Hello and welcome to this panel, the very first panel of our second Island Finance Forum, the Island Finance Forum 2022. I can already see people going ahead and introducing themselves in the chat box. Please go ahead and tell us who you are, where you're joining from, and what you're interested in getting from this session. And you'll also see a poll coming up on your screen with a few questions, so our panelists and myself can have an idea of who you are, where you're joining from, and some background information. My name is James Elsmore, and I'm the Director of Island Innovation. We are a global network connecting island communities to work together and collaborate on sustainable development. And this forum specifically is to bring in the financing aspects to look at how we can connect sustainable development with effective financing mechanisms. Today, I'm very excited for this panel, Leave No One Behind, Building an Equitable Recovery for Island Communities. And we'll be looking at the relevance of inequalities and building more equitable societies, particularly with the post-COVID context in which many islands suffered extremely from the economic challenges around tourism and other industries over the last 2 years. So what does it mean as we look into a post-pandemic era? Hopefully we're pretty much there. I guess that's up for debate if we are or not. How do we address inequalities, but also look at economic growth for island communities? And we have a very interesting lineup of speakers to give their perspectives. We'll have 4 different speakers, starting with an opening keynote, and then there'll be an opportunity for discussion amongst our speakers and also for our audience to submit questions on the topics. I'll now share the poll. So we have around 40% of people joining from the Caribbean, around 30% from North America, and others from Asia, the Pacific, Europe, South and Central America. You can see people in the chat joining from Antigua and Barbuda, the Cayman Islands, the Philippines, Mauritius, Kiribati, Grenada, St. Vincent, Greece, a real wide range of people joining. And I can also see we have a mixture of sectors, around half of you from the private sector, but also a mixture from the government, NGO, academia, and then a whole range of other industries represented from finance to environmental services. With that, I'd like to invite our first speaker to deliver his keynote address. We're very honored to have the Premier of the British Virgin Islands, Andrew Foy, here. He also holds the title of Minister of Finance and is the chairman of the Virgin Islands Party. He is in his 6th consecutive 4-year term. So with that, Premier, if you'd like to come onto the screen, we'll ask you to deliver our opening keynote for the first panel of the Virtual Island Summit. Many thanks. We can see you.
Okay, yes. All right, I'm right here now.
Wonderful.
I was also like to say a pleasant good day and also God's blessings to everyone. The Honorable Julie Thomas, Chief Minister of St. Helena, Mr. Stefan Kossoff, Development Director for the Foreign Commonwealth Development Office, FCDO in the Caribbean and UK Director to the Caribbean Development Bank, Mr. Maximiliano Lane Fiesta, Senior Associate RMI Islands Energy Program, Mr. James Elsmore, CEO Island Innovation. Ladies and gentlemen, overall, again, a pleasant good day and God's blessings to all of you. I would like to begin by thanking Island Innovation for the very kind invitation to participate in the Island Finance Forum 2022 and to deliver the keynote address of this panel on equitable recovery for island communities. Mr. Elsmore, you and your team have created a powerful platform by which to bring attention to islands and their various challenges, especially as it concerns financing for sustainable development and climate change, adaptation and mitigation. We thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, at this stage in the global pandemic, it would appear that COVID-19 is receding in most places. Governments around the world have rolled back mask mandates and social distancing requirements in recent weeks, and international travel is rebounding. The global economy has also seen a return to growth, despite the headwinds presented by the economic effects of the Russia-Ukraine war and rapidly rising inflation. While China is experiencing a severe spike in COVID-19 cases at this time, which I do hope will be brought under control in the weeks ahead, I believe it is safe to say that in most regions of the globe, we are in the early stage of recovery from the pandemic. However, let me state that I'm cognizant that we are not out of the woods as yet, but we are getting there. The question that now confronts us is, what type of recovery will we see? There is not a straightforward answer to this, but it is clear that the shape of the recovery will be different between countries. Small island states known as SIDS, in particular, have the dual challenge of recovering from the pandemic while at the same time managing climate risk such as hurricanes and sea level rise. They must also cope with the external shocks to their small, open economies that are currently being negatively impacted by rising inflation and the sharp spike in energy and fuel prices. The combination of these things has actually increased the vulnerability of SIDS, which must be taken into account by our international partners when it comes to concessional financing to respond to recovery from the pandemic, and also to fund climate resilience and sustainable development. Presently, the British Virgin Islands and other SIDS are largely not eligible for this type of financial support, whose criteria does not consider vulnerability. Comparatively speaking, SIDS have managed the pandemic very well, but COVID-19 has highlighted the structural weaknesses and inequalities in many SIDS that must be addressed as they recover if we are to build more resilient societies based on sustainable development. The social sector has been the most affected, with many persons becoming vulnerable during the pandemic. In this period of recovery, we must find a better balance in our societies that reduces the social inequalities that create crime and a widening gap between the haves and have-nots. It is important that our solutions address the actual needs of those who are hurting most, and that we avoid administrative barriers that would prevent support from reaching them due to bureaucratic entanglement. Among other things, we need stronger social safety nets to protect the vulnerable, especially persons that are low-wage workers in the hospitality sector, who are the most likely to be laid off or have their hours and income reduced during a crisis. Among other things, it is imperative that SIDS put in place permanent unemployment insurance schemes of some kind to make their economies more shock responsive and to limit the extent of economic and social damage to local communities by external events. We also cannot forget workers in the informal economy and must find a way of extending some form of social safety net to them as well. In the British Virgin Islands, we are taking steps in this direction with the support of the International Labour Organization. Among SIDS, there are also the problems of youth unemployment and the gap in the level of pay between men and women. In the recovery process, greater advocacy for youth and women is needed, accompanied by targeted interventions and policy changes. Young people need better preparation to join the economy as opposed to fading away into the informal sectors that carries great risk. My administration has made a concerted effort to retrain persons who were laid off in the tourism sector during the pandemic to help them retool for work in other industries and sectors such as construction and renewable energy systems. The pandemic has also revealed a digital divide between communities within our societies. This digital divide in many ways reflects the inequalities in SIDS. The poor and those in rural areas have less access to internet service and the digital technologies needed to engage meaningfully in the world today. The various formal and informal surveys on digital access that were conducted during the pandemic have given governments a clearer picture of things. We now have a much better idea of the extent of the digital divide and who has been left behind. We also have a stock of devices from the pandemic period that can be redeployed to those households most in need, since the pressure for virtual education has eased with students back in the classroom. In terms of internet service, we need to ensure that access is available in public spaces such as libraries, community centers, and the specific hotspots in towns and villages, so that those persons without service at home can have some form of access. Special hotspot devices can also be issued for home use by making special arrangements between the government and telecom providers. It behooves all of the relevant government authorities and partners to revamp their digital strategies to address the gaps highlighted by the pandemic. This is what we are doing in the British Virgin Islands with the support of UNDP. On the brighter side of things, the pandemic has pushed islands to become more digitized in their operation and more innovative in the delivery of services. In fact, digitization in both the public and private sectors has accelerated at a pace previously unimaginable in many SIDS. Although connectivity across many communities remains imbalanced, great strides have been made. SIDS have significantly improved their ability for work and education via online platforms, as well as boosted e-government and the ability to deliver public services electronically and virtually. This will hopefully improve the overall productivity and efficiency of SIDS in many areas of life going forward. In fact, it could be an economic boost for those SIDS who wish to expand their professional services and technology sectors. Greater digitization can also make SIDS more resilient to external shocks, particularly natural disasters and catastrophic events, by strengthening our ability to bounce back quickly and re-engage in the digital economy. In terms of economic resilience, tourism in particular is bouncing back, but SIDS have an opportunity to build in economic diversification to their recovery. Agriculture and fisheries have emerged as critical sectors, especially as it concerns food security, given real concerns about global supply chains. More investment in these sectors is needed for their expansion. For this very reason, in the British Virgin Islands, we recently passed a food security and sustainability bill that will support this goal. Underlying the long-term structural transformation of SIDS economies is a transition to renewable energy that will significantly lower energy costs. The transition to a low-carbon economy in general will also be much cleaner and healthier for our societies and the world. Our ambition in the British Virgin Islands is to achieve 60% renewable energy generation by 2030, and we are well on our way with microgrids for solar energy currently being installed. Finally, as SIDS recover, We must keep in mind that there can be no separation of economic recovery from social recovery and the building of greater resilience across the society. They are intimately tied together and can no longer be separated if cities are to grow and develop sustainably over the long term. Toward this end, in the British Virgin Islands, we are completing a national sustainable development plan with the support of the United Nations as a framework for the sustainable development of our society based on the Sustainable Development Goals. Once completed, the plan will be the guide for our growth and development over the next 15 years and beyond. At the point of implementation, we will be seeking the support of our partners, including the United Nations, United Kingdom, European Union, and Caribbean regional organizations such as CARICOM, OECS, and ACS. I believe it is prudent for all SIDS to create such a plan for themselves because it is a policy framework that is needed to guide our action. I would once again like to thank Island Innovation for the opportunity to deliver this keynote address. Islands are resilient and we will recover from the pandemic. But we must seize the opportunity before us to address the structural imbalances and inequalities in our societies for an inclusive and equitable recovery based on sustainable development. SIDS share common challenges, and there must be a paradigm shift in terms of national life and our response to those challenges. Because most importantly, we are in this together. I thank you.
Many thanks, Premier, for that excellent opening speech to set the discussion for this panel. We really appreciate that perspective, and also the balancing realism with optimism, which I think is extremely important when we're having these conversations. I do hope that we'll be able to stay around for the rest of the session, and thank you very much for taking the time with us today to be here. I'd now like to invite our next speaker up, Stefan Kossoff. Stefan, if you're able to come onto the screen. And Stefan is representing the foreign and Stefan, are you there? I'm not sure if we're having an issue with him. He's representing the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office. Oh, great. Can you hear me, Stefan? Yeah, we're possibly having some... No, we cannot hear you. I'm not sure what's happening there. Seems like there's an issue. Stefan, what I'll ask you to do is, if you're able to leave the session and perhaps rejoin, we'll go to the next speaker, and I'll work with you to find a way to join. Christian can be in touch with you. Apologies for that. We'll go instead to our next speaker, Maximiliano Lane Fiesta. Maximiliano, I believe, is now joining us from the Dominican Republic, but is based in Puerto Rico normally, is that right?
Well, lately I am based in Guatemala, but
okay,
working a lot in Puerto Rico and the Dominican Republic.
Fantastic. And he's a senior associate at the Rocky Mountain Institute, the Island Energy Program. We're very happy at Island Innovation to have had a long relationship with the Island Energy Program and all the great work that you all are doing in the Caribbean region, especially Puerto Rico and others. So looking forward to hearing from you about the energy side of this, looking at how the energy contributes to an equitable recovery and economic growth. So Maximiliano, over to you.
Thank you, James. And I know, or in my list we had 7 minutes. I'll try to do this in 5 because I know the time is super tight. But I'm super happy to be here representing RMI. My name is Max, and I work in the Caribbean, trying to do what the name of the session clearly stated. And when I read it, I was so excited. Leave no one behind. When I think of leave no one behind, I was super inspired because this phrase describes exactly what we are trying to achieve. In many locations where we are working, we are super happy to see that governments are promoting the transition to renewable energy, but in many places, this means very large solar and wind power plants not living, in some cases, not even mentioning distributed renewable energy, for example, in roofs of homes, industries, hotels, etc. I know in many other islands this is not an issue, but in some places, yes, it's happening. So the essence of our work is ensuring that in such locations we can break the systemic, financial, educational barriers that exists, so we can enable this type of adoption of renewable energy, one that is equitable, reliable, resilient, and affordable for everyone. So every location is different, but we have found that the blended finance model is what for us is working right now. By blended finance, we mean that to build a project, we can provide some part of the cost of the system. Let's say a percentage of the cost. It will change depending on the location, and then the facility or the institution or the person that is doing the project could finance the rest. This is working, at least in Puerto Rico and the Dominican Republic. The idea is well received, but there are several variants. For example, in Puerto Rico, we are using philanthropic funds to provide this seed money that will enable the rest of the system to be financed in part, and normally the percentage of the money that needs to be provided is much higher than in the Dominican Republic, for example, because there is a reliability problem and we need large battery systems. So the systems are not that self-supporting in financial terms. In the Dominican Republic, we need less money for the seed funds, but it's interesting that here in the Dominican Republic and in many places in Latin America, there is what we call subsidies to the electricity. The government is paying a lot of money to the generators so that many people can pay less than what the energy really costs. So there is a subsidy there. What we are proposing is to optimize the use of these subsidies. Why pay a generator when we can pay the facility, help this facility to acquire a solar system that will have a much larger a much larger, oh my God, I lost that word, return of the investment, will provide tons of benefits, local jobs, and well, you guys know all the associated benefits with renewable energy. So we as a team created this blended finance design tool. This is a mathematical software that we can adapt to any location where we are working. Basically, it will tell us what is the optimum donation or subsidy or incentive that every facility needs to have so that we can finance the rest, providing savings from day one. basically what we want is that if a facility is paying $1,000 today for their electricity, after we install the system with this financial solution, they will start paying $850, 15% savings, which are repaying the bank, operation and maintenance, and insurance, and just makes this much more attractive and less risky for everyone. Let's remember that sometimes solar systems are, in many cases, the largest single investment that a person is doing in their life, sometimes with more value than their own property. So, well, I'm gonna stop here. I know the time is short, but super happy to continue the conversation
Thank you so much, Maximiliano.
Have a wonderful day.
Really appreciate that, and I think the energy angle of economic growth is so important for Ireland. It cannot be neglected, and I think that's actually a very nice transition to our next speaker, who I'm not sure may or may not touch on energy issues specifically, but I know that the energy issues in St. Helena are critical for the island, and that these are things that have been addressed recently. So our next speaker is the Chief Minister, Julie Thomas, joining us live from St. Helena, that we're delighted to have. And I also wanted to note that Chief Minister Thomas will also be keynoting a session later this week, tomorrow, that will specifically focus on the challenges for Ireland of being green, let's say, for want of a better word. So, Chief Minister, congratulations on being I believe, the first person to take this role for this relatively new position for the island. We're really pleased to have you here, and thank you so much for taking the time. So we'll hand over to you now.
Okay, thank you, James. And yes, I am the first Chief Minister for St. Helena Island. And I think for those of us joining you here today, I think it would be worth saying that we've been in our posts as the new ministerial government for about 6 months now. So it's been a steep learning curve for us, but enjoying the challenge. And I guess this is a very, very good opportunity to hear from other islands what you're doing and what things we could be doing. You are right. I'm not going to focus too much on energy today, because I am giving a keynote tomorrow that's entitled "It's Not Easy Being Green." So we'll focus more on that tomorrow. So hello to everyone. My name is Julie Thomas, and I am the Chief Minister for St. Helena Island. Firstly, I would like to take this opportunity to thank the Island Innovation Forum for allowing St. Helena Island to participate in this important and somewhat emotive subject, Leave No One Behind, Building an Equitable Recovery for Island Communities. So I'm going to start by giving some context to what this means for St. Helena. We are in a unique position. St. Helena Island is a remote island, 1,200 miles from South Africa and 1,800 miles from Brazil. The nearest island is our sister island, Ascension, at 703 miles northwest, and we have a population of approximately 4,500 people. To date, we have been successful in preventing COVID-19 entering our community through strict management and monitoring controls, to include a quarantine period that commenced at 14 days and currently remains at 10 days. Although this approach has been extremely successful in keeping our community safe, it has had an impact on our fragile tourism sector, which of course has adversely impacted on a number of different sectors whom depend on visitors or returning residents, known to us as saints, as their primary income streams. Discussions are currently ongoing in respect of what will be our next steps to address our economic position, whilst considering the social impact of our decision-making process. What must we do to responsibly move from our strategy of minimizing the risk of COVID that has secured our community to date to a more exposed strategy, whilst ensuring that the risk to our community remains manageable. This, as you can all imagine, is a difficult task. Most of you will relate to what it's like living in small communities. Very few can be described as strangers, and everyone knows everyone. For us, this is heightened with a population of only 4,500 people and having to secure facilities and resources that will cater for a town when our population is that of a small village due to our isolation. We do not have the security of knowing that if we cannot provide an essential product or service, we can make the trip to the nearest town or city. This makes us extremely vulnerable at times, but it also makes us an innovative and creative society, which I believe is what we need to focus on if we are to achieve our vision. And our vision was published about just over nearly 2 months ago now, and it says that a sustainable environment that creates opportunity and inspires social and economic progress, ensuring a better quality life for all. Achieving this ambitious vision will take teamwork. We are heavily reliant on UK financial aid and are continuously faced with having to prioritize our priorities to ensure that we are able to facilitate our core services at a satisfactory level, whilst implementing much needed additional services to enable us to progress towards becoming self-sustaining, an aim that this new ministerial government is keen to address. We acknowledge that this aspiration will require effective planning, communication, working together, and innovative implementation, which is an enormous challenge, but one in which we are keen to succeed in. Currently, we have one commercial flight arriving every 2 weeks from Johannesburg. It is obviously hoped that this can be increased to regular weekly flights, as was the case pre-COVID. However, this will only happen when numbers increase to demand such. This is not the case thus far, since commercial flights recommence at the end of March. For the past year, St. Helena was receiving one direct flight per month from the United Kingdom, which was primarily deemed a repatriation flight or for those requiring medical assistance. I will now delve a little deeper into why it is important to leave no one behind. There is a popular saying that goes, if you can't measure it, then you can't manage it. But it is perhaps particularly true of inequality. Over 100 years ago in Victorian Britain, there was no national health service, no state pension, and no universal and free secondary education. Statistical surveys that measured inequality conducted by researchers Roundtree and Booth at the end of the 19th century are widely credited with changing public opinion and kickstarting the government policy reforms that focused on addressing both inequality and improving equal opportunity. Here on the small island of St. Helena, we have health and education services for everyone, and we have pension and social benefit schemes. But if we want to understand whether some groups have less opportunity than others, we need to do what Roundtree and Booth did and measure social outcomes. Ideally, we'd conduct sample surveys that provide representative data for these groups. But islands like St. Helena, with very small populations, face some unique measurement problems. One major difficulty is getting measurements that are genuinely representative of small groups of the population. Bigger samples help. Our population census is the biggest sample of all, of course, but running regular social service surveys with large samples is just not possible. Not only is it expensive, but we end up surveying the same households time and time again. Our response rates drop, and our chance of getting representative results for the groups we're interested drops as well. So what else can we do? One answer lies in using the data and records that are created every day when collecting taxes, administering the law, and delivering public services. On St. Helena, for example, we know by analyzing income tax records that women earn around 5% less than men on average. and that St. Helenian workers earn less than a third of their counterparts in the United Kingdom. Linking these records to other records, such as school and hospital registers or social benefit records, would open up new measurement and analysis possibilities. For instance, we might better understand whether children from less fortunate families have different school results or health outcomes, and why. Should island communities invest more in their administrative data systems and in techniques like these? That's a question the forum might help to answer. We know that data systems can be expensive, that they can be complex to implement, and that we might need to invest in new skills to link them together. Have other small island communities had experience of this, or even of conducting regular social surveys that manage to avoid some of the problems we experience with our small population? In closing, I'd like to focus on two important areas of concern: our migration patterns. The first and key concern is the glaringly obvious one, and that is the need for economic development to lift low wages and reduce migration overseas. Affordable housing is closely linked to uncompetitive salaries and migration, as the costs of building or buying are high compared to salaries. People will migrate for other reasons as well, opportunities and family, but competitive salaries on the island will promote circular migration, whereby working people come and go according to economic opportunities. This has long been a feature of island life, with Saints returning to retire. But to grow the working age population of Saints, competitive salaries are needed. The next concern is tourism as a driver for economic development. Given the age dependency ratio and the need to grow the working age population to achieve economic goals, it is necessary to not only retain and attract Saints back to the island, but to also attract highly beneficial migrants. These are likely to be high earners. Globally, the tourism economy is characterized by low pay and seasonal and part-time work. It is likely that this will also be the case in St. Helena. Therefore, without addressing low pay, minimum rights and protections, there is a risk that those in the visitor economy will be left behind workers in other sectors of the economy. In the way the economy is developing, it will be important for my government to continue to regulate for what is socially considered to be fair terms and conditions of employment. I return now to our vision, which I referred to earlier. At the heart of our vision, there are three main dimensions: our environment, our economy, and our social obligations. To enable us to achieve our vision, addressing our social obligations in all policies is crucial if we are to address the current challenges impinging on our ability to create a more optimistic and viable future for all who live on our island. We are committed to ensuring that our policies and legislation address the issue of inequity and lead us to an inclusive society which leaves no one behind. Thank you.
Many thanks, Chief Minister, for that holistic approach to economic growth and recovery. And I think what really resonated with me was we've had many discussions that we've hosted through Island Innovation about remote work and the idea of the opportunities that provides. And I think so often it's looked at through the lens of tourism, attracting people to come and live on the island. And we need to be giving more attention to the opportunity that gives for islanders themselves to either stay on the island and have jobs that perhaps wouldn't have been possible. And I know this is particularly relevant in the case of St. Helena, but also, as you say, the diaspora giving opportunities for them to return. So that really resonated with me. And thank you very much for making those points. I'm looking forward to the discussion tomorrow on the energy aspects for the island as well. Now, I believe that Stefan, you were able to get back on. I'm not sure what happened. Everything was running smoothly, and then technology got the better of us. So I'll reintroduce Stefan Kossoff, who is the Development Director for the FCDO, the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office in the Caribbean for the UK. Stefan, over to you. Thank you very much for being with us.
Thanks, James, and I hope you and the audience are are now hearing and seeing me.
Perfect.
Better late than never. Better late than never, as they say. And with all the protocols that have now been observed, I just did want to take a moment to thank you and the organisers for inviting me to this Island Finance Forum. As the Premier of BVI said at the outset, it really does provide such an important vehicle to put the spotlight on issues which affect small island nations and territories. And I'm therefore delighted to be able to participate along with the rest of this rather august panel. As you said in the introduction, I'm the Development Director for the UK Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office in the region. Our development work covers 8 of the ODA eligible countries of the region, and I'm responsible for overseeing the implementation of our programme. I think, as was made clear in the opening words from the Premier of BVI, it's very difficult to talk about recovery from COVID, the economic growth paths for the future, and addressing the needs of the most vulnerable in this particular region without talking about the climate challenge as well. And as I'm sure everyone on this forum knows, the Caribbean is one of the most disaster-prone regions in the world and is becoming even more so as a result of the impacts of long-term climate change. Small island developing states, or SIDS as we know them, are acutely exposed and vulnerable to extreme weather events, rising sea levels, and a range of other natural disasters. And the consequences of this are frankly alarming for the entire region, for the governments here, and for those who dwell in the island communities. And as the OECD and others have observed, the economic costs to SIDS of disaster events are considerably higher on average than for other developing countries. So in 2021, on top of the multiple impacts arising from the COVID pandemic, the region experienced a volcanic eruption in St. Vincent, an earthquake in Haiti, and for some countries like Barbados, where I'm currently speaking to you from, the first hurricane event in 65 years. In fact, in 2020 and 2021, these were the first and third most active hurricane seasons on record for the region. And these developments have served to reinforce the importance and urgency of supporting the strengthening of national and regional capacity to prepare for and respond to shocks and address the long-term implications of climate change. And as everyone, I think, has now also said today, the last 2 years have also underlined what we already knew, that disasters disproportionately impact women, youth, the elderly, and persons with disability, with that gap between the haves and have-nots seemingly growing. So for the UK, the tagline, "Leave no one behind," is much more than just a catchphrase. It's actually the driving imperative at the heart of our development work here. Because as was underlined by the pandemic and now the conflict in Ukraine, if one of us is not safe, it has the potential to do harm to us all. And as we seek to address climate change and support economic recovery across this region and indeed the whole world, it's vital that we tackle issues around equity and inclusion head on. So our development portfolio in the Caribbean focuses on strengthening disaster and climate resilience as a central aspect of our work. Currently, over 80% of our £450 million programme here is devoted to building more climate resilient infrastructure, as well as economies and communities that can withstand natural disasters and recover faster after shocks. So we have a flagship £350 million infrastructure intervention here called the UK Caribbean Infrastructure Fund, which is being delivered by the Caribbean Development Bank, through which we're supporting 15 major climate resilient infrastructure projects across the region. And a key element of our approach to that is to ensure that social and gender considerations, as well as issues like disability access, are factored into the design and implementation of these projects. So we are not just building a road or a port or upgrading a water supply system, but rather we're putting in place sustainable infrastructure which benefits the whole community, including those who are most vulnerable. The UK is also supporting inclusive and responsive disaster management through the strengthening of SEDIMA, the Regional Disaster Management Agency, and also national disaster systems. And through our Engender programme, which is being executed by UNDP, we also support the implementation of inclusive adaptation and mitigation actions in priority sectors. The UK government also supports the Climate Resilience Agency of Dominica, or CREED, which is helping that country to realise its vision of becoming the world's first climate resilient nation. This follows devastating hurricanes which destroyed much of the country in 2017, and includes a strong focus again on building resilience at all levels of society, from the government down to the household level. So as the region begins to emerge from COVID, I think there are real risks that other speakers have also spoken to of seeing inequality deepening. It's therefore essential that inclusion and equity issues are factored into policy responses from governments and also from the international community. So what does that mean? I think it means we have to think about 5 things. Firstly, we need to have inclusive and accountable processes which put the perspectives of vulnerable and disadvantaged groups at the heart of programme and policy design. Secondly, as others have said, we need strong social protection systems and safety nets which can smooth the impacts of shocks on the poorest and avoid the deterioration of their long-term prospects. Thirdly, and critically, we need high-level ownership and leadership to put social and gender dimensions at the centre of national efforts around climate change and economic recovery. Fourthly, we do need to focus on economic diversification, as many other speakers have referenced. This is a region that's excessively reliant on 1 or 2 sectors. And lastly, we need to rise to the data challenge set out so eloquently by the last speaker. The point being that if we can't measure poverty and inequality outcomes, we can't know if we're making suitable progress to tackle these challenges. The UK is also supporting an inclusive recovery in various different ways. For example, through our youth skills programme in the Eastern Caribbean, we're working to promote better skills and access to employment for left behind groups, including young people and persons with disability. And through our work with IDB Compete, which is a private sector programme, we are striving to build a dynamic, innovative private sector which promotes the full breadth of talents across this region. That includes fostering small and medium-sized enterprises led by women and generating thousands of new jobs for both women and young people. Looking forward, the UK has consulted extensively with regional counterparts to inform our strategy over the period 2020 to 2025, I should say. And at the 10th UK Ministerial Caribbean Forum last year, the Caribbean and the UK agreed to work together to promote a green, inclusive and resilient recovery that leaves no one behind. At COP26, the UK also announced a raft of new programmes that will target transformation in the region. For example, we're supporting a new small island developing states capacity and resilience programme, which will provide £40 million over 5 years to build capacity to improve access to climate finance and address those implementation bottlenecks which impede delivery. At the COP, we also launched a task force on access to climate finance, which aims to reshape the global finance system to make it more accessible for climate vulnerable developing countries. Jamaica is one of the 5 countries piloting this work alongside Fiji, Bangladesh, Rwanda, and Uganda. And in keeping with requests from SIDS to support economic diversification and the protection of marine environments, the UK is in the early stages of developing a new sustainable blue economies programme. Alongside these programming initiatives, the UK also used our COP26 presidency to help champion critical reforms of the international architecture for the benefit of SIDS. The UK affirms the position set out in the Glasgow Climate Pact that vulnerability should guide our decisions on the allocation of finance. There's now a clear weight of evidence which shows that GNI per capita does not fully capture the development position of SIDS, and the UK has therefore issued a joint call to action which has all called on all providers of finance to review the potential for using vulnerability indices to inform their decision-making processes. And we're delighted that a UN high-level panel has now been set up to review these issues and report back later this year. So in summary, it's clear that there's a lot that needs to be done, and quite urgently. We're therefore looking forward to working with Caribbean governments, the private sector, regional and international partners, and civil society to make progress on those critical areas identified in the Glasgow Climate Pact before handing over the baton to Egypt for COP27. We all have a role to play, and the really hard work is ahead of us. So we must do it together and ensure we bring all groups and people along on the journey. Together we can build back better, balancing people, planet, and prosperity for the benefit of all. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Stefan, for that broad overview. We covered a lot of ground there, and so we got a lot of different directions that we could go now as we move on to the Q&A. So with that, I'll ask the other speakers, please, to turn on their cameras. We have about 10 minutes. We'll maybe go a little bit over, but I understand if some of the speakers have to leave and have other places to be. There's a few questions coming in. I just did want to remind people that all of these sessions will be recorded and will be available. There's lots of sessions happening at different times. We don't expect anyone to sit through all the sessions this week, so they are definitely going to be available and as part of our Island Innovation Library, along with all other sessions for follow-up afterwards. So, okay, we covered a lot of different angles. One topic that came up a few times was energy. One topic that also came up more than once was blue economy and nature conservation. But I'd love to hear maybe briefly from any of the speakers that want to go. Feel free to either wave at me on screen or put your hand up through Zoom. There's a raise hand button. Which do you think, I mean, if you could prioritize maybe your top three issues, maybe looking at the SDGs or look at energy. These issues vary from island to island, and of course they're going to vary according to your different perspectives. But which you think are really the top issues that you've seen that have been dealt with perhaps well, or there are initiatives that are being dealt with? What I'd really love to hear of is examples of mechanisms that are being put in place for finance and investment to be driven in various islands, whether that's foreign direct investment, government investment. Where are your priorities now? So anyone want to jump in and give that summary? And while we're waiting for that, also remind our attendees, there is a Q&A box separate to the chat box. And please do go ahead and add in any questions for our speakers. Maybe I'll start with Chief Minister Thomas, if you would like to share with us some of your key priorities. I know you covered these in your speech, but in summary, now we've heard everyone's perspectives.
Okay, so I think being a very isolated island, for us, we're heavily reliant, as I said before, on UK aid, but we're also heavily reliant on importation. And one of those is going to be fuel for us. We've been heavily reliant on that. So one of the things that this new ministerial government will be focusing on is our energy bills and trying to ensure that we focus more on renewable energy so that we don't have to be so heavily reliant. And because we're in a sunny, we've got sunny weather here, just for those of you in the cold, we can focus more on solar energy, and hopefully that is something that can go across the whole community for both businesses and homeowners alike. The other one that we'll focus on, being a very small island, we've just approved some funding for our agricultural sector for food security with regards to becoming self-sustaining with our food security, because obviously, again, up until now, we've been very heavily reliant on importation of even our fruits and vegetables, etc. So those are two of the key ones I'll mention at this moment. But to be honest with you, everything on our priority list at the moment all focuses on leaving no one behind. Having such a small population, it's unfair to consider that we'd leave anybody behind.
Absolutely. Thank you, Minister. And actually that came, just as you said that, another question came in asking what options exist, which you just answered, I think, what options exist for St. Helena to diversify the economy from UK aid. And actually, I think an issue that affects almost all islands is the larger role of government, the higher percentage that government plays as a player in the economy than many mainland or other jurisdictions. And so another question that came in was about public-private partnerships, how islands are creating or how island jurisdictions are creating a conducive environment to allow for public-private partnerships, or also including perhaps philanthropic partnerships within that, to use government and obviously acknowledging the role of government, but also create social impact returns. Premier Foy, I don't know if there's anything that you'd like to say about public-private partnerships and perhaps a role and anything that the government in the British Virgin Islands is doing to increase opportunities for in investment.
Well, thank you so much. Yes, we've been one of the dependent territories of the United Kingdom. We do have certain protocols that are signed. One of the things that we're trying to negotiate at this time is how to relax some of the conditions during that time to allow for more of these things to happen without compromising the transparency and accountability, because we have to be cognizant that no one ever anticipated a pandemic period, and one like COVID-19, the worst in the last 100 years. So most of the policies and some of the measures and conditions and terms that were existing has to be relaxed over a little period of time to allow all countries to be able to be more flexible without compromising integrity to diversify the economies. One of the areas too that I do see while you're diversifying the economy is that all of us have to put our heads together on how to approach our financial institutions, because we cannot have a pandemic where every single business is taking a loss except our financial institutions. They cannot keep the same terms and conditions involved that were there before the pandemic. For example, they may give you the moratorium from the payment of your loan, whether it be business or home, but then on the back end, they want to still get it back with the interest at the end. So that is tantamount of being in the ocean, in the deepest part of the ocean with no land around you, and you're waiting for help, and they throw you an anchor and tell you it's a lifeguard. So we have to be careful with those kind of things, because at the end of the day, when you have more persons, no matter how you try to diversify the economy, where you have more persons losing their homes, losing their businesses, and eventually that will hurt the small businesses, which is the bedrock of any community. So we have to talk to the financial institutions along those lines, and also the relaxation of some of these areas. The diversifying of our economy is going to come through being innovative. This is a time that innovation is going to be needed, now more than ever. And we have to see also what are the key areas with green energy as we recognize them, because we have to recognize that the sun is free, the sea is free, yet we continue to have persons move us towards the direction of having to pay these exorbitant bills with fuel, etc. And now we're paying for those even more because of the conflict in Ukraine. So now we have to make that paradigm shift. But rightfully so, as the Chief Minister, Chief Minister Thomas rightfully said, it's costly to be green. To get these things started up, it costs quite a bit. But the beauty with this is that there's a front load cost for this. But then on the back side of it, then it becomes better for us all. So I think the paradigm shift has come. The pandemic has forced something that is good. So we got something that's good out of something that's bad. In that a lot of these things to help the common person along the way that will allow us to have more families supporting themselves and the economies to be more diversified have been bogged down in the weeds of greed amongst financial institutions, greed amongst even in terms of us using natural energy and green energy that could have already lowered the electrical bills. No electrical bills, as a matter of fact, based on fuel. It moved more along the line of just certain charges. And that's because electrical companies are afraid of knowing what are they going to do with these employees. Well, repurpose them into green energy, repurpose them into other areas so that transition can be much easier. Now in the private-public partnership, there's a lot of them that we're gonna need, even among the green energy. There are persons that can come in and team up with government so that we can become more green. There are persons that can come and help our young people, especially to be in businesses such as electric stations, bringing electric cars. In the BVI, we have made everything that's green duty-free for a few years to encourage that shift. And that's even before Ukraine, we've done that to allow the shift, the paradigm shift that comes with that. Also, we have to look about how do we invest in green bonds and different areas. So the pandemic has forced us to shift to public-private partnership, but it also has forced us to shift our thinking. It is a challenge in terms of leadership, which the chief ministers and other leaders of countries would say, because you're shifting, but while you're shifting, you have to be leading while bleeding, because you still have to meet the needs of the people where they are while you're shifting to be able to allow them to meet their own needs. So it calls for more investment, but investment that's going to come in and complement what you're doing, not come in and take over the future of the country for your future generations, that they'll still have a stake in what's happening. So we need investors who are mindful that yes, you're going to make some money, but two, it has to be one that you're going to develop the people while you're making your profits, but also develop the people, bring them along. And once you have that buy-in by the local composition of persons, no matter where they are, then you'll be able to sprout new entrepreneurs. So even funding for new entrepreneurs needs to be the order of the day right now. How do we put funding there and allow for more entrepreneurs to come forward is something that we're exploring. So it's going to take the bleeding edge thinking and technology to be able to get out from where we are, because we are in uncharted waters. But what all we need to do is right there. We just need to change our mindset, which I see more and more people are doing, whether we want to or not. Because first we couldn't meet. We were told we couldn't have meetings in person. You couldn't get a degree online. But COVID has changed that. More people are meeting online, and more people are getting degrees online, and the degrees were just as much, not just as much, same or even more than those other outside. So there are areas: entrepreneurship, public-private partnership, going green, investing in those areas, and that will help us tremendously.
Thank you so much, Premier. And I will say that Island Innovation started our conferences as virtual events before the pandemic, and we saw the opportunity to connect islands. Of course, I remember our first event when we had to explain everyone about this thing called Zoom that they had to download and how to use it. And of course, things have definitely changed a lot over the last few years, which has been fantastic to see. And of course, islands are some of the biggest beneficiaries of that. None the least, St. Helena, of course, with the new Intellect collection, that and we're really happy to have you here to represent the government, Chief Minister Thomas. We are over time, and so I do understand if any of our speakers have to leave, but I have a couple of other questions that I'd love to quickly address. So we'll just keep you for another 5 minutes or so. This topic of energy, of course, comes up constantly. Before the war in Ukraine, it came up, and now, of course, it comes up even more. And so for Maximiliano, I'd love to know, for you, I think the Premier addressed very well this challenge of the upfront investment cost, that actually clean energy pays for itself quite quickly, but you need to be able to have that funding up front. And there are lots of different barriers that perhaps people don't think about. One, insurance, for example, is a huge in the Caribbean as a barrier for that. And so from an investment point of view, I'd love to hear maybe what RMI is doing, or some of the key barriers that you see as from my perspective, that upfront finance mechanism seemed to be one of the biggest impediments, because this is actually something that makes financial sense in the long term, but where's the money come from in the short term is the big question. So anything you could say on that, Maximiliano?
Thank you very much, James. That's the key point where we are trying to focus on the finance mechanisms. Where do we get the money, right? Of course, we can do some projects with philanthropic capital in some places, donations basically, that cover this initial cost of the system that enables the rest. But how sustainable is that when we want to apply these solutions to a very large problem, like a full island program or a full, I mean, these countries are very large. So one of the solutions we are using, for example, here in the Dominican Republic, is the government spends almost $1,000 million per year on energy subsidies. That means using tax money to pay generators that so that people don't pay that much. So when we think of that, it's incredible, but that super large amount of money goes to it gets burned, if we see it in other words, because it's just money that it's used to pay for the fuel, subsidized. What if we use this money to actually cover the initial cost of the solar systems that will be installed to the users, right? So it's a much better use of the money. In fact, we are working on studying exactly how much return do I get when I give it directly to a generator, or how much it produces that same money when I use it to enable the financing of a renewable energy system. So yeah, that's where we are going. That's some of the directions. The money is there, but we just need to use the money in a better way.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you for that. And one last question before we wrap up for Stefan. Obviously, the UK government is playing a role post COP, and COP27 coming up this year. Feels like we just finished the one COP and we're on to the next COP. But there are some key elements around climate finance that came from that. And I'm curious to know, post COP26, in terms of the work you're doing in development aid, what was the impact of COP in changing those activities, or what were the key outcomes of COP in the work that you're doing?
Thanks, James. Well, I mean, I think the COP has been more widely important than just for UK aid in changing the conversation. And that although we have still a way to go in terms of delivering on some of the commitments, the fact that adaptation is now front and center is a very, very important outcome from COP. Was a key ask from SIDS, the fact that the discussion around loss and damage is now firmly on the agenda for the next COP is also really, really important in that regard. But as I alluded to in my speaking points, this whole question of tackling the climate finance architecture is central to what we will be doing going forward. Huge constraints there in terms of both accessing and utilizing finance that we now really need to work with the IFIs and others to solve. And that's why the task force on access to climate finance, which I referenced, is such an important part of that, but also bringing resources directly to help SIDS navigate the complex international bureaucracy to get projects funded, and then also supporting them with the delivery is a key part of what we will be doing and what we will be advocating to the rest of the international community going forward. Because linking directly to the theme of this discussion, unless we get that fixed, then the hopes for an inclusive and green recovery will be somewhat quashed. So I'm very much with the other panelists in terms of that's where we need to be investing our efforts. Renewable energy potential here is obviously really significant. And just relating back to the last question, this idea of providing bridging finance to then encourage the private sector to come on board is one of the critical things that we've been doing, specifically in the area of geothermal energy, which has huge potential in a number of the islands of the Eastern Caribbean, but obviously the private sector, without the confidence that the energy is actually usable, won't come on board. So we've been working with those countries to test the potential for the energy utilization. And in the case of Dominica, we've even gone one stage further in terms of developing the plant infrastructure and the electricity network around that. And obviously that's absolutely critical for all the reasons people have stated, for the energy security of the region, for reducing carbon footprint, and for enabling resources in many small island developing states to be used for other purposes to invest in their long-term economic futures. So that is critical. And then just one other thing that I did want to mention is that the UK has a private sector arm that people will have known as CDC, has now been rebranded as British International Investment. And that will be playing a really, really important role in the future in terms of mobilizing private sector finance, which is what we really need to focus on, given the constraints on governments and their fiscal situations, mobilizing private sector finance in many of the promising areas that we've spoken about here, and building some of those private public sector partnerships, which I agree are going to be critical if we're to have the step change that we want to on the economies of this region.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. And I think for me, attending COP, one of the critical opportunities and what we're trying to do through this forum was to try and share knowledge between all islands of different political statuses. And so I was really glad that we're able to have UK overseas territories attending this forum as represented in this panel, alongside small island developing states and other island regions like Hawaii, Puerto Rico, that represent various different political categories, because I think it's critical that these islands are able to share and interact and learn from each other, because the issues and many of the solutions are so similar. And that's the goal from this event. Well, with that, I'd like to give a big thank you to our speakers. I really enjoyed that discussion. I think that was a really useful way to look at this macroeconomic issue, kick off the panel, kick off the week. And of course, energy we touched on, blue economy, all these other areas. We're going to have specific channels to talk about these throughout the week ahead. So thank you. We really appreciate you being here and for everyone who attended. We have another session starting in 45 minutes that specifically addresses the role of chambers of commerce. How can island chambers of commerce play a role to encourage development and encourage inward investment on islands? And so we have a diverse number of regions represented in that panel, which should be very, very interesting. And later today, we'll also have a final panel for the day about the race to net zero and what the concept of net zero, which was one that was talked about a lot at COP, what does that mean for islands? So with that, thank you so much for this panel, and everyone have a wonderful rest of your day, whatever time zone you're in. Thanks again. Goodbye.